Hello, welcome to the second vodcast of Science 10 Ecosystems. If you can tell by this cartoon here on the front, we're going to be looking at how different species interact with each other and giving the names to those types of relationships within this chapter. So here are your objectives that you can take a look at. Don't forget in your notebook, what I would like you to be able to do is use these kind of as a checklist at the end as your review to say, yes, I can do these things, or no, I can't, and now I need to go review. And don't forget about your new vocabulary terms that you can always go to the website and look up Quizlet and play some games, make some cue cards in order to prepare yourself for the multitude of vocabulary that is within this chapter. So let's get started on the actual content. We're first going to look at the actual interactions. There's that term again, biotic. So we're going to look at the living things and how they interact between different species. So here's one example, a clownfish and a sea anemone. Here we have a lion, and it looks like it is having some sort of debate with the hyena here. And here at the bottom, this picture looks to be like maybe a cheetah with chasing a gazelle. And so this describes the three different types of interactions that we see between species. Symbiosis, competition is the above here, and predation is the one with the cheetah and the gazelle. So the first type of biotic interaction we're going to look at is symbiosis. Now this means living together. So this is defined as a close relationship between two different species in which at least one of those species must benefit from that relationship. So there are three types of symbiosis that we're going to take a look at. The first one is called parasitism. So this is where one member benefits and the other is harmed. I'm sure you can think of some examples of those parasites. This is where an organism that survives by living and feeding on the inside of or attached to the outer surfaces of that organism and therefore doing that organism harm. However, there's very few parasites that actually directly kill their host. An example that we're going to take a look at in class, an interesting one, is the relationship between the cuckoo and the warbler. However, the ones that you might be thinking of are the examples of a leech in this top diagram here, and another example of the mosquito, in which both of these organisms feed off of the blood of animals or humans. Some other examples that we can take a look at here are the parasitic worm of the dog heart, which is spread by mosquitoes. This is known as the silent killer of dogs, as it lives in the dog's heart and clogs up those arteries. It's very hard to screen for. However, you can get monthly medication to prevent it, but that comes with a cost. The other example is the gypsy moth with the wasp larvae on it. So these larvae feed on the tissue of the moth larvae as it develops, and therefore do end up consuming that moth. So symbiotic relationship number 2 is called commensalism, which actually means eating at the same table. So this is where one member benefits and the other member is unaffected. So the example shown here is the remora and the shark. So when the shark feeds, that remora picks up the scraps, and that remora benefits because it gets the food, while that shark is completely unaffected by the relationship. Here's some other examples of commensalism. So barnacles on the skin of a whale, and they're barnacles attached to the whales, and they're transported to a new habitat because barnacles can't move. Another example are the epiphytes, and these are a group of plant species that grow on certain woody plants. So an epiphyte draws its nutrients from the atmosphere and therefore does not harm the host tree or shrub in which it is growing on. The third type of symbiotic relationship is mutualism, and this is where both species benefit in the relationship. So we can all fondly remember clownfish and the sea anemone in Finding Nemo. So the clownfish's job is to chase away anemone-eating fish, and the anemone provides the clownfish with a shelter. So a few other examples that I will talk about are the boxer crab and the sea anemone. So the tentacles are poisonous and they fend off predators and get food. The boxer crab holds the anemones in its claws to use its stinging tentacles to fend off the predators. In turn, the anemone consumes the crab's leftovers. Another odd example is the plover and the crocodile, where the plover feeds on things that are stuck in the crocodile's teeth, and so the crocodile has clean teeth for preventing infection. Cleaner shrimp and eel, in which the cleaner shrimp, the the shrimp clean the eel, and therefore they get the food, and therefore the eel gets clean. Another example is the blind bulldozer shrimp. It builds the house, and the goby fish provides the protection, and specifically the early protection against predators, because that blind bulldozer shrimp can't see very well where the goby can. Okay, just take a moment to complete this summary table in your notes. Now let's consider species A to be the species that benefits from that symbiotic relationship. So what I want you to do is describe what happens within parasitism, commensalism, and mutualism for species B. Now note, I'd like a negative sign to mean a negative relationship and a 0 to mean no effect, and obviously the plus to be the positive relationship. So here's a new term that we're looking at here. Ecological niche, and specifically I'm looking at that word niche. Now this is where it describes an organism's role within an ecosystem. It can include anything physical, chemical, or biological, and its interactions required for it to survive, grow, and reproduce. So this includes its jobs and its effect with other organisms within the community. So this takes into account different characteristics. So here are some examples: diet, foraging techniques, reproductive methods, habitat, or its ecological role as a producer, a decomposer, or a consumer. So although different species may have overlapping habitats, ideally we don't want them to have overlapping niches, meaning that we don't want them to forage in the same areas, because this will result in competition. So here's an example, and this naturally happens. So here are 3 different types of warblers: the Cape May warbler, the bay-breasted warbler, and the yellow-rumped warbler. So you can see all within this spruce tree, they all occupy a different niche, meaning they're going to forage in different places. So they're not going to compete with each other in their feedings. So now that we've talked about symbiosis, the second type of biotic interaction is competition. So now you can see from the diagrams below, some of them being somewhat humorous, but some of them being what actually happens in true competition. And so this is where a harmful interaction occurs between 2 or more organisms. Now this usually occurs when resources are limited and or niches overlap. And so this can be limited resources such as food, space, water, or mates perhaps, and they have to be in the same habitat at the same time. The third type of biotic interaction is predation. So this is used to describe the interaction between one organism, which is the predator, that eats all or parts of the other organism, that is the prey. So as a result, one organism benefits here and the other is harmed. So this can include the herbivore-plant relationships. Now predators have adaptations that tend to help them catch their prey, while the prey had adaptations to help them avoid the predators. And therefore there's this predator-prey relationship that exists. And this is the major driving force behind evolution. I'd like you to pause the vodcast and complete this activity in the space within your notes that have been provided. And notice that once you've finished actually brainstorming a list of predator and prey adaptations, I want you to actually dissect down between behavioral adaptations, physiological adaptations, and physical adaptations. Now you might have to go back to your notes to actually look up to figure out what those adaptations are. So pause the video now and we'll finish up with your notes shortly. So a common type of physical adaptation is when the prey animal actually mimics another animal that is dangerous or tastes bad. Now we have a name for this, and it's called mimicry. So to test your knowledge, which snake do you think is actually poisonous down below in the 2 diagrams? They look very similar. One is poisonous and one is not. So here you can see the poisonous coral snake as compared to the scarlet king snake, which is not poisonous. But yet that scarlet king snake has mimicked its colors so that the predators would actually think that it is the poisonous coral snake and therefore would not go near it if they have any learned response to stay away from a poisonous snake. Here's another example, the viceroy butterfly compared to the monarch butterfly. They both look quite similar. The monarch butterfly has a really bitter, distasteful taste to it when it is consumed, but yet the viceroy butterfly, which looks like the monarch butterfly, actually is palatable to most species, but because it looks like it, some predators will actually avoid that viceroy butterfly. So when we're looking at predator and prey relationships, we're looking at the numbers of predators and how that influences the prey and vice versa. So a common example that we look at here is the lynx and the snowshoe hare. So this diagram, as you can see, is showing you here on the left-hand axis is the number of hares, and that is the red lines that we see. On the left-hand axis is the number of lynx, and this is the blue line that we see. Now, one thing you should note is that the number of prey, the lynx, never has to be as high as the number of prey, the snowshoe hare. And you can see here that this is tracked over a number of years, over many generations. So as that predator population increases, the prey population tends to decrease because more are eaten. But yet when there's a decline in the prey, this leads to a decline in the predator population as well because there's not enough to eat. And then there's this recovery phase. So this allows the prey population to recover and increase in number once again. And once that has increased once again, now the predator population can increase because there are more of the prey. So we're going to do an activity in class in which this, to make this kind of hit home a little bit more for you in this relationship. But in the meantime, what I'd like you to do is answer these 3 questions. Pause the video, and I'll be checking this when you come into class tomorrow. And the last thing that we have to define in this vodcast is biodiversity. Now, this just refers to the number and variety of different individuals and species within an ecosystem. Now, key is with ecologists that we look at the healthy ecosystems generally have a high biodiversity. So most biodiversity losses occur due to the result of a loss of habitat. And humans often have that negative impact on that biodiversity because we do take overhand habitats to increase our resources and our land use. So many efforts have now been made to lessen this impact in order to maintain that biodiversity. For example, there's been ecological management programs to try to balance the human progress with the preservation of maintaining biodiversity. So there's 2 things I would like you to do in your summary table in your notes. One is complete this summary table where you're discussing the relationship between all of these different types, if species A, if species B. You can choose how you're going to report on that. And the second one is to complete this concept map to fill in the blanks to figure out, do you have an idea of what we've just discussed, and can you kind of summarize up what we've learned in this podcast? I'll be checking all these notes tomorrow, and that is it for this podcast.